welcome back. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Bronx Bites. Bronx Bites. Bronx Bites. Anyways, okay. So here we are. I need to know what the ever loving heck is going on inside California State Prison, specifically Mule Creek State Prisons. I'm sure you guys know by the thumbnail, by the headline, what I'm going to talk about, and that you guys have probably heard about it already. However, Bronx over here did some digging and found out some more information that I don't think you guys have heard yet. And when I say digging, I mean like bones in the yard digging. Get it? In this case, literally bones in the yard. Anyways, here we are, Bronx Bites. Let's get into it. Mule Creek State Prison is located in Ione, California, in Amador County, which is just a tad south of Sacramento, so directly north of Modesto. And if y'all remember, Modesto is where the Lacey Peterson case happened. By the way, did you know he recently got beat up in prison? Anyways, back to Mule Creek State Prison. So this happened last November, and inmate David Brinson was permitted to have a conjugal visit. If you don't know what a conjugal visit is, it's when an inmate is allowed to spend time with their wife or partner, and it's up to 40 hours in like an apartment type setting, but it's still on the grounds of the prison. And guards are allowed to check in on them, but for the most part, they try and give them as much privacy as possible. An inmate's allowed to have a conjugal visit based on their behavioral history at the prison, and it basically has to be perfect for a long time for them to be permitted to have a conjugal visit. They have to have like no write-ups, no fights, no incidences, and after careful review by all the staff and the warden, they're allowed to have a conjugal visit. So David Brinson, who is 54 years old, he's been in prison for a long time, since the 90s. He's been serving a life sentence due to being convicted of unaliving 4 men during a robbery back in 1990. He was permitted to have a conjugal visit with his wife, whose name is Stephanie Dowles. She's 62 years old at the time. This happened, like I said, in this past November, so not very long ago. And Bronx told me that on November 13th, 2024, David Brinson called authorities around 2 a.m. during his conjugal visit with his wife, Stephanie Dowles, reporting his wife had passed out. EMTs showed up and attempted to resuscitate her, but she was ultimately pronounced deceased at 2:51 a.m. It has seemed initially that she has passed of natural causes, but after an autopsy was conducted, it was determined that Stephanie Dowles' cause of death was actually strangulation. As of today, charges have not yet been brought against David. However, I'm sure we can expect charges to be filed and brought against him accordingly. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard about this case recently. Everybody's been talking about it, but the information that we have is, have y'all heard of the second unaliving at the same state prison in California just 4 months before this one happened? Like, what the heck is going on here? Anthony Curry, also housed at the Mule Creek State Prison, was also serving a life sentence for attempted second-degree red rum, spell it backwards, of his ex-girlfriend in 1999. His ex-girlfriend was found at a truck stop with a pew-pew to the head wound to the head. She now lives partially paralyzed. Anthony Curry is also serving time for a separate carjacking, so his crimes are definitely violent in nature. Anthony was also allowed to have a conjugal visit with his wife, whose name is Tanya Thomas, back in July of 2024, just 4 months previously. Now, the details on what happened between Curry and his wife Tanya aren't super clear, like in the one with David Brinson. However, what we do know is it sounds like a very similar situation. Tanya was unalived by strangulation in the middle of the night during a 30 to 40 hour conjugal visit. Both victims have adult children that are highly upset, obviously, and are demanding change when it comes to conjugal visits, and we don't blame them. We understand the point of prison is to reform the inmate, but what does a person who's serving a life sentence really have to lose? Where do we draw the line when rewarding good behavior at prison, yet still trying to allow reform and give inmates something to look forward to? Giving somebody, especially an inmate, something to look forward to, such as a conjugal visit, helps curb the buildup of tension and alleviate violence within the prison. But is a conjugal visit too much leniency? Or maybe there are better precautions that can be taken when allowing private time with their partner outside of a prison cell. I don't have the answer, and it sounds like Mule Creek State Prison doesn't either. We haven't heard that they have even halted conjugal visits until further notice. I think it's important to keep in mind these are men serving a life sentence for red rum and attempted red rum, and they are never getting released. Yet, on the other hand, reform is the goal. We don't have the answer, but the main goal should always be the safety of the person who didn't commit any crimes and is not serving a life prison sentence. Bronx thinks that they should allow maybe a trained guard dog in the conjugal visit and they can just bite the inmate if they get violent. I don't know, maybe it'll work. Anyways, as always, we're keeping the loved ones of the victims of these senseless crimes in our thoughts. That is it for this episode of Bronx Bites. We have two unalivings at the same prison. For some reason, only one is being talked about. Bronx gave you the scoop. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Bronx Bites.